From a beautifully lit house in the Gasse, small street, the raucous revelry of a wedding feast erupted into the night. It was one of those spring-like nights that was dark and misty but yet warm. The celebration of the marriage of two longing souls who share the same lot, a lot that may conceivably arise in sunny brightness but also become overcast and sullen, for a very, very long time, was most appropriate for it. But what happy and joyful individuals those folks from the bygone eras were over there. Like us, they experienced difficulties, and when bad luck struck, it did not do so with cushy pillows and gentle hand pressures. It seized hold of them with a clenched fist and roughness. However, they were like swimmers in calm seas when they let their joyous emotions out and tried to have fun. With confidence and vigor, they bravely entered the stream and allowed themselves to be carried wherever the water went. This was the reason behind the jubilee and mindless eruption of soul-possessing gaiety that came from this home of matrimony. The wealthy Reuben Klattner, the father of the bride, had just remarked, "And if I had known that it would take the last gulden in my pocket, then out it would have come." In fact, it appeared as though the final groschen had actually flown, as plates piled high with geese and pastry tarts were flapping around. The wedding feast had been going on from 2 o'clock, that is after the marriage ceremony had been done outside in the open street, until almost midnight, and even then the sarvers or waiters were rushing from chamber to room. All this wealth of food and drink seemed to have had a double blessing since, first of all, they didn't appear to become any smaller, and secondly, they were always disposed of in different locations. This desire was undoubtedly piqued by the appearance of a little, unimportant-looking man who resembled a dwarf. Nevertheless, he was widely regarded by everyone. They had specifically written to contact the renowned Prague Lebnar. And when was there ever a time when Lebnar pulled one of his pranks that didn't make someone's heart thaw out and make them laugh? Oh, you're dead now, you foolish one. Previously always prepared with a snappy retort, your lips are now pursed. Previously never silent, your mouth is suddenly silent. However, thou hadst nothing to fear when the hearty peals of laughter once roared forth at thy command, intercessors as it were, in thy behalf before the holy throne of God. And the happiness of that other world, the happiness that has always belonged to the holiest rural rabbis, was thine. The youngsters had gathered in one of the rooms to dance in the meantime. Strangely, the humor from Prague's witticisms complemented the sound of trumpets and violins. The laughter in one area was so boisterous that the candles on the small table appeared to flicker with fear. In the other, a normal conversation was taking place, but only occasionally devolved into loud tittering, when an elderly woman crept into the circle and demonstrated her prowess at a redawa, which the young people had never heard of before. The bride, dressed in a thick silk bridal gown, could be seen right in the middle of the crowd of dancers, her golden hood's tip draped low over her face. She never stopped moving. Everyone who invited her to dance got up and danced, but if one had watched the young woman's activities, they would have appeared hasty, anxious, and nearly mad to him. She didn't even look her own bridegroom in the eye. He spent the majority of his time at the doorway and seemed to enjoy the fool's humor more than the dance or the female dancers. Whoever wondered why the young woman's hand burned and why her breath was so hot when someone got close to her lips? Who would have thought to notice anything so odd? A faint whisper has already reverberated around the group, and several lips are smiling covertly. Unexpectedly, a group of women were observed entering the room. The freshly wed vanished behind the ladies as if by magic as the music suddenly burst into one of its loudest passages. The bridegroom was still left standing on the doorway with his idiotic smile, but he didn't last long before disappearing as well. It is difficult to explain how it occurred, but as long as there are brides and grooms in the world, people will continue to comprehend such dexterous motions via experience. Despite how little it seemed to be noticed, the key personage's absence signaled the need for everyone to take a break. The dance started to sag and abruptly ended as if on schedule. The raucous chaos that always surrounds such a beautiful wedding reception started now. Half-drunk voices still echoed across the table, mixed with one more loud chuckle at the idiot from Prague's jest. Someone was occasionally grasping for the arm of their chair or the edge of the table because they weren't entirely sure of their balance. As a result, he either turned over a neglected plate or spilled a beer glass. While this in turn caused a new commotion, someone else stumbled into the debris in his haste to leave the area. But when everyone gathered against the door, the commotion was really quieted, since shrieks and screams of pain could be heard coming from the entry below. The entire throng quickly and forcefully pushed back into the space, but it took a while until the stream was pushed back again. Meanwhile, agonizing cries could be heard coming from below once more. These sounds were so agonizing that they brought even the most inebriated people back to awareness. They yelled at one another, "By the living God, what's going on down there? Does the home have a fire? She has left. She's gone," a woman's voice yelled from the entryway below. The wedding guests screamed, "Who? Who?" as though frozen with frigid fear. The woman at the entrance yelled, "Gone! Gone!" and Zelda Klattner, the bride's mother, hurried up the stairs, pale as death, her eyes dilated with the most horrifying dread, convulsively gripping a candle in her hand. "For God's sake, what has happened?" could be heard behind her on all sides. The unfortunate woman appeared to come out of her coma when she saw all the people around her and the cacophony of voices. She then gave a timid glance in all directions, as if her humiliation were overwhelming her fear, and she muttered, "Good folks, nothing, nothing. I inquire, what was there to happen, in the name of God?" However, the dissimulation was too obvious to be able to fool them. If nothing occurred, then why did Zelda scream so loudly? One of the visitors yelled to her. Zelda now sighed in anguished tones. Yes, she is gone, and she has certainly done herself some harm. Now that the reason of this bizarre spectacle has been identified, the wedding feast is now without the bride. The bridegroom walked downstairs to the dimly lit apartment shortly after she mysteriously departed in an attempt to find her, but in vain. At first he felt this was a bit of a timid joke, but since he couldn't see her here, a strange premonition overcame him. He yelled at the bride's mother, "Sorrow to me! This lady is no longer here." This party, which had maintained such admirable composure, was then suddenly plunged back into chaos. There was nothing else to do but search every crevice. It was mentioned everywhere. There have been a number of unusual bride disappearances reported. On such nights, evil spirits were known to prowl around and harm people with various sorceries. Strange as it may sound, Zelda Klattner herself was among those who at this particular time accepted this explanation. But only for a little period, as she immediately exclaimed, "She's gone. I know it. No, no, my good people." Many of them, notably the moms, were very apprehensive for the first time, and they anxiously beckoned their daughters to them. Only a select handful shown fortitude and insisted that they continue their quest, even if it meant repeatedly avoiding the Iser River. They quickly moved forward, ordered candles and lanterns, and set out. The timid pursued them while running up and down the stairs. Before anyone realized it, the room had been abandoned completely. Without saying a word, Reuben Klattner stood in the hallway's entrance and watched the visitors pass by. Fear and sour disappointment had nearly driven him insane. Oddly enough, Lebnar of Prague was one of the last people to stay in the chamber above Zelda. After everyone had left, he went up to the distressed mother and said in a tone that was not typical of his demeanor, "Now, Mrs. Zelda, tell me, did she not want him?" Zelda screamed in horror as she realized she was alone with the idiot. Whom? Leb replied, moving even closer to Zelda. "I mean that maybe you had to make your daughter marry him," in a really empathetic tone. "Make? Then have we created her?" Zelda groaned, giving the idiot a doubtful look as she regarded him. The idiot laughed sympathetically in response and then retreated. "Then nobody needs to search for her," he said. "Leave her alone, that's better." He left without saying goodbye or thank you. At the end of her flight, the source of all this commotion had already arrived. The rabbi's home was located next to the synagogue. It was constructed at an angle on a relatively small roadway, surrounded by big shade trees. Even during the day, it was gloomy enough. People said that when they pulled the records of the law out of the ark at night to call their members by name, the quiet supplications of the dead could be heard in the grimy temple of God, making it nearly impossible for a frightened person to approach it. At this hour, a shy shape passed, or rather ran, through this deserted street. She looked behind her as she approached the rabbi's home to check if anyone was following her, but everything around her was quiet and dreary enough. The eternal lamp hanging in front of the Ark of the Covenant was the source of the faint light that streamed through one of the synagogue's windows. However, she felt as though a supernatural eye was observing her at this very time. She grabbed the door's little iron knocker and slowly tapped it, very terrified. Although this strike was louder and more powerful than her heartbeat, it was still audible. Steps were then heard moving slowly down the hallway after a brief pause. Long time had passed since the rabbi had lived in this abandoned home. A few months before, his predecessor, who was close to 100 years old, had been put to rest. A call had been made for the new rabbi from a far-off region of the nation. He was in his prime and not yet married. Before he arrived, nobody had ever heard of him. However, his intellectual depth and personal nobility made up for his lack of experience. He had brought his elderly mother with him from their faraway home, and she stood in for his wife and child. The rabbi, who was occupied at his desk even at this late hour and had therefore not missed hearing the knocker, said, "Who is there?" The almost silent person outside said, "It is I." "If you want me to hear you, speak louder," the rabbi said. She said again, "I'm Reuben Klattner's daughter." The rabbi thought the name sounded odd. He was still unfamiliar with too few members of his church to know that the woman whose name was just now repeated had been married on this day. So after pausing for a second, he said, "What do you wish so late at night?" She pleaded with the rabbi, "Open the door or I'm going to die right now." The bolt was retracted. The rabbi was moved aside as something shiny and rustling entered the dimly lit hall. The candle he was holding did not provide him with enough light to see it clearly. She had already passed him and entered the room via the open door before he had a chance to confront her. The rabbi secured the door once again while shaking his head. When he returned to the space, he discovered a woman's shape seated in the chair where he typically sat. She was facing away from him. Her hunched head was resting on her breast. Her lace-shading golden bridal hood was pushed down over her forehead. Despite the rabbi's bravery and piety, he could not get over his fear. He yelled, "Who are you?" in a booming voice, as if the question's volume alone could drive away this creature, who to him appeared to be the source of all the bad spirit's spells at the time. She stood up and sobbed in a voice that seems to emanate from human agony. "Do you not know me? Me, whom you married to a husband just a short while ago under the chuppah, marriage canopy." The rabbi froze in place when he heard this voice. He fixed his focus on the girl. He must now view her as a person devoid of reason rather than a phantom. After a moment of struggling to find the words to respond, he finally said, "Well, if you are she, why are you here and not in the place where you belong?" She said angrily, "I know no other location to which I belong more than here where I am." The rabbi was still perplexed by these comments. Is the woman in front of him truly insane? He must have believed this since, in an effort to not frighten her, he now addressed her in a kind tone of voice, as we do with persons who are afflicted with this sort of illness. He said, "My daughter, you belong in your parents' home, and now that you are a wife, you belong in your husband's home," said her father. The young lady whispered something, but it escaped the rabbi's hearing. But all he could think was that he was looking at some sad person whose mind was out of control. "What is your name then, my child?" he said after a little pause in an even more loving voice. "He doesn't even yet know my name, God," she cried in the deepest agony. He apologized. "How should I know you? For I am a stranger in this place." This kind comment seemed to have the intended impact on her agitated thoughts. She paused, then gently whispered, "My name is Vale." The rabbi realized immediately away that his demeanor toward his unexpected guest was appropriate. As he drew closer to her, he questioned, "Vale, what do you wish of me?" She said glumly, "Rabbi, I have a grave sin pressing hard upon my heart. I have no idea what to do." With a sympathetic expression, the rabbi said, "What may you have done that cannot be mentioned at any other moment than right now? Vale, will you allow me to counsel you?" "I won't be advised," she screamed fiercely once again. "I am aware of what is oppressing me. Yes, I can grab it by the hand since it is so close to me. Are you calling that being advised?" The rabbi said, "Very well," seeing that this was the perfect ploy to persuade the girl to speak. "Very well, I repeat, you are not dreaming anything. I think you have committed a serious sin. So have you come here to repent of this sin? Do your husband or parents have any knowledge of it?" She abruptly stopped him. "Who is my husband?" The rabbi's mind began to fill with ideas like a turbulent sea where conflicting hypotheses cross and recross each other's paths. Should he treat her like a typical sinner? After a moment, he asked, as gently as he could, "Were you perhaps forced to be married?" The only response to this query was a repressed sob and a fierce internal fight that manifested itself across the entire shaking body. Encouraged by his child, the rabbi responded, "Tell me, my child." The young woman began speaking in tones that the rabbi had never heard before, tones that were weird and far beyond anything human. "Yes, Rabbi, I will talk, even though I know that the ideal outcome for me would be for me to never leave this place alive." "Rabbi, I wasn't coerced into getting married. My parents have never once told me you must, but rather that my own will or want has always come first. My hubby is a wealthy local resident's son. To become a member of his family meant being elevated to the position of First Lady and being buried in gold and silver. And that was the one thing that made me fall in love with him. Because of this, despite how difficult it was for me, I pushed my heart and will to marry him. But I hated him in my heart of hearts. I despised him more and more the more he adored me. But I was influenced by the gold and silver. They yelled, 'You will be the first lady in the street,' to me more and more." She paused, practically worn out by these remarks, and the rabbi instructed her to keep on. "What else have I got to tell you, Rabbi?" She began once more. "Even though I have never lied, not as a child or an adult, during our whole engagement, it has seemed as though a huge, enormous lie has been trailing me at every turn. On every side of me I have witnessed it. But today, while I was standing beneath the chuppah rabbi, and he slipped the ring off his finger and put it on mine, as well as when I was forced to dance with him at my own wedding and realized for the first time that he was the lie, as well as when they carried me away." The young woman cried loudly and lowered her head even lower over her breast, as this heartfelt confession escaped from her lips. The rabbi silently observed her. That was never spoken by a crazy lady. Only a soul aware of its own wrongdoing, yet enthralled by a strange force, could endure such suffering. He didn't feel pity for her. Rather, he felt more sorrow for the woman's suffering. Despite the convoluted explanation, everything made sense to the rabbi. The reason for leaving the father's residence at this time likewise needed no justification. He really wanted to answer, "I know what you mean," but all the words he could think of were, "Speak further, Vale." She made a U-turn and faced him. Not yet had he seen her face. It was heavily covered by the golden hood with the lace shading. She questioned, her cheeks flushing with disdain, "Have I not told you everything?" The rabbi repeated, "Everything," with a curious tone. In addition, he merely stated this out of shame. She pleaded simultaneously, fiercely and gently, "Do you tell me now, what am I to do?" The rabbi screamed, "Vale," as he began to feel disgust at this private interview for the first time.